Okay.
Hey guys, Doug here from 2 Plus Stuff, and today we are diving into our first video, taking a look at the General Handbook 2017. Now, I'm going to actually start this series talking about the narrative section. Now, why start with the narrative? Well, simply because I want to play some Triumph and Treachery games before I give a full review on it. I want to have an educated opinion rather than just kind of speaking out of my butt. So I want to wait on that. And it's also a very robust section, so it requires more time and research. But the narrative section has pretty much been pruned down in the 2017 edition, and so I wanted to kind of discuss that today. Now, fundamentally, there are really three parts of the 2017 General's Handbook narrative section, and that is, the first one is your time of war rules, meaning these are like geographical locations in the mortal realms, one for each realm, except for the realm of whatever, Sigmar's and Heavens or whatever. So you get an idea of specific battlegrounds there. We'll talk more about that in a second. The second one is some narrative missions. These are mostly, as far as I can tell, pulled from specific Realm Gate War books, which, you know, it doesn't have to all be new original material. Some of those missions are very flavorful and a lot of fun. And the last section is siege warfare, which I want to touch on in a bit. Now, speaking first of the actual like Realm Gate rules, they are actually super interesting. They allow you to basically, if you're not familiar with it, pick a location and have specific rules for that location in the mortal realms. So for example, we could get a picture here. In Akshi, this is a specific place in Akshi called the Capillaria, which I'm assuming is how you pronounce it. And it gives you some cool rules for terrain, some modifiers to your specifically ranged attacks, and a unique spell. All of these things give a unique spell to any wizards that you have in your army. Now, what makes this so cool is that before this, the rules for these various realms were all split up into a myriad of campaign books. And not all of them were, how should we put this, not fair is not the word I'm looking for, because a lot of the narrative stuff isn't meant to be fair. But they were kind of heavy tilting toward the story that they were trying to convey, which makes perfect sense in a campaign book. But what they've done here is something that I think is kind of a lot more interesting. See, by giving kind of non-story specific rules for each realm, you can play in each of them, have thematic games, but it doesn't pull too hard towards one faction just because it's in that realm. So for example, in the I don't remember which campaign book it was, but they had the rules for the Realm of Death. Okay, and it was like super ridiculous stuff. And you're like, well, I mean, I want to play there, but I don't want to like be nut stomped by a dead death player that just walks up to the table. And so it required like a heavy conversation with your friends about what was truly thematic and things like that. But those same rules in the General's Handbook are much more toned down. They're not trying to convey the story that is specific to the campaign book, but they do allow you to tell your own story in a rule set that is flavorful but not overwhelming. And some of the stuff is just cool. I'm going to stick with the Realm of Fire for my example, where any non-open terrain basically is like it's like all on fire. It's like fumes and piles of ashes coming up, and so basically shooting attacks can't really see through things. It's very difficult to navigate, and I think that is so thematic and so much fun to think that everything is just consumed in this fire and you're trying to wade through it. So that's a really cool thing. Also, they modify attacks that if it's a ranged attack, I believe it's over 20 inches. I can check, but I don't want to look. It gets bonuses because it's like flaming arrows, which is really awesome. And then obviously everyone knows the fireball spell. Now, as far as I can tell, the spells, none of them are super game breaking. I don't think these are going to radically change anyone's army list or anything like that, but they do add some flavor for any kind of battleground that you're fighting in. Now, one thing I do want to add here, and this is actually kind of cool, is at the bottom of each of these is a little tiny bit of artwork, and it's not even a very in-depth one about what that specific area of the realm looks like. And I think that's super important. I think it's really cool for you and your opponent to have a visual representation of the battleground that you're fighting in. What I would also suggest, and this is just something that I've done for myself for personal inspiration, because GW doesn't have a ton of artwork about each and every realm, if you type in, go to Google image search and look up any Magic the Gathering land card art, all of the artwork for their land cards, if you're not familiar with Magic, they have a type of card called land. It's like a resource. And they have, it's just like landscapes or cityscapes or whatever kind of background they're looking for. and they're all assigned magic, much like the realms are assigned to magic too. So if you wanted like an Akshi type artwork, you could type in, I think it's like Fire Mana Magic the Gathering artwork, and it'll pop up with a bajillion pictures because this game's been around for so long. So you can kind of get mental inspiration from a lot of different things. There's lots of great fantasy artwork out there in the world. That's just my suggestion if you're looking for a specific landscape that you want to recreate. Now, the second part of the narrative section is going to be the missions. Now, the missions are not super flavorful. And I don't mean like flavorful in the sense that they have great rules for telling a story. The thing is that they're very specific stories, like the Beast Run from whatever the orcs do across this huge gorge and things are trying to kill them. I'm terrible with the book names, I'm sorry guys. But they're flavorful in and of themselves, but as far as putting them together for a singular campaign, they're kind of disjointed. See, what I do miss from the last General's Handbook is the kind of different campaigns that they instruct you to do. So that the ladder campaign, or the map one, or the ones where it's like they actually built you the tree of like, you know, if this mission fails, do this, with the Seraphon and something else, where they kind of create for you a narrative campaign using kind of like win-loss statistics. And I think that's really, really awesome. I wish that it was in this one. I wish it was modified a bit. I also understand that they kind of included things like that in the Path to Glory book, which they recently released. But that aside, this does provide some good missions to get you used to narrative gaming in terms of things kind of being tilted to one side, unique command abilities. You can weave a great story with them. I want to make that perfectly clear. It's just a lot of the oomph was taken out of this section. That was actually one of the highlights of the last General's Handbook that I really, really loved. And I definitely feel like the focus of this year's edition has been on the matched play section, which is going to take quite a while to go through. Now, the last part of the narrative section is going to be siege warfare. Now, they used to have rules like this for fantasy battles way back in the day, and I really, really enjoyed that. I love the idea. You can have a campaign, call it a campaign, but really it's just a series of games that is one player attacking another player's fortifications. So you'd start with siege stuff to try and break in there, and then a series of small games to have combat inside, say, a castle or something like that. And so it was a ton of fun. You could do all kinds of cool stuff with it. And that's definitely something I'd be interested in doing again. Now, siege warfare doesn't give you the full campaign picture of what I just described. What it really is about those specific games where one player is trying to destroy the fortifications and defenses of another. Now, notice I don't say walls and stuff like that, because siege warfare, the rules are pretty clear, and with images and everything like that, that it's not about walls, right? You don't need to buy a dread fort to play this thing. They have one where I believe it's a Khorne Bloodbound is attacking a Sylvaneth, and the Sylvaneth just have a bunch of wildwoods kind of shaped as a defense perimeter. And so you can do anything like that. You can use crumbled buildings and say that you're fighting through ruins. You obviously could make your own walls. You could do whatever you want. But the point is, it has less to do with the physical attributes of where you're fighting and more to do with the tone that you want to convey as far as one's attacking, one's defending, and there is some kind of fortification defending you. Now, these missions, they give you 2 missions for siege warfare, which really, how many more do you need? Basically, one player has the fortifications, they build them themselves, and both players have what's called a siege phase, which only happens once as far as I can tell by reading it a few times. I want to make sure I get that right. But you each kind of choose your tactic for how you're going to destroy each other, right? The attacker is going to say, oh, I'm going to starve him out, or I'm going to tunnel underneath him, or there's another one. But the defender also chooses the same thing. There's a little chart in there, and based on how your two things compare, it kind of sets the tone for how the game's going to go. It gives modifiers to defending and attacking and so forth. So it is really, really cool that you can not only set up the tone of a game for attacking, defending, you can have all kinds of terrain rules, you can create very cinematic sieges and things like that, and defense networks, but you also have modifiers that go in there. Now, again, the more rules you stack, the more complicated it gets, so if you wanted to go full nuts narrative, you could go siege warfare in the realm of Akshi, using, your battalion rules. So that's a lot of rules to keep track of. Mind you that everything that you add this is just more stuff to keep track of. So I suggest the first few siege games really, really keep it simple, and kind of building up from there. Like I said, you get 2 siege missions, and they are really, really great examples because they both have very, very vastly different deployment strategies and ways of setting up and things like that. So they are really, really thematic. They are diverse. You can obviously flip table sides and things like that. You can move things around. You can create your own battle plan based on those things, but they add quite a bit to the game. Like I said, I'd like to see a campaign centered around the siege of an area. So something like, say Clan Pestilence was attacking a Stormcast Eternal fortress, right, full of free people. You would have your preliminary games of, say, like skirmish style stuff, where Clan Pestilence is trying to take out a guard or lower a bridge, right? There's some small objective that plays into the bigger thing, and if the Skaven succeed, then the door goes down, and then you have a siege game where there's a hole in the defenses that they can get through. You play a siege game like that, and then you play an all-out war, regular Age of Sigmar game inside the fortification itself. So, like, things that build and stack on top of another are really, really fascinating to me. Again, that's all contained in one isolated, location. It's this castle and this army attacking it, but it adds quite a bit of flavor, and all the games play into each other. It's a cool narrative thing that I feel like it was an opportunity that they missed. Honestly, if nothing else, I think I might try my hand at making something like that. If I do, I'll let you know. It takes a lot of work to think of those kinds of things, but I'll absolutely keep you guys in the loop. And to be honest, that's the narrative section, which is a shame. It's actually the weakest section in the book right now. Remember, last year's General's Handbook contained the Path to Glory and then a few different variations on campaigns. Now, I don't understand why they took out the map campaign and things like that in the narrative, kind of like chart one. I wish they were still here. I know that some of that stuff got moved over to the Path to Glory book. Obviously, that's why Path to Glory is not in this one. But it would have been nice to have those things as resources there in the main book, so you have to buy 2. In addition to that, I do think you should buy Path of Glory if you are a narrative player. It seems like a no-brainer. Skirmish, you can see my review. I'll put a post up at the top about it. It's not my favorite. It is great for some specific cinematic things, but I really think if you're a narrative player, you're going to want Path to Glory to get slightly bigger games that aren't quite as clunky rules-wise, that work a lot smoother, that introduce you to big game concepts a lot better. But what do you guys think about the narrative section, specifically of the General's Handbook 2017? I'd love to hear comments down below. I respond to as many as I can. I definitely read all of them, but they kind of come in fast and furious, and sometimes they get missed. I love hearing your guys' opinions. I use a lot of that material as inspiration for future videos. So go ahead, click subscribe, leave a comment down below telling me what you think about narrative play. If you'd like to support me in a more personal way, I really appreciate that. You can click on the link down below to go to the 2+ Stuff store, and then you can buy yourself a awesome, beautiful gaming mat for you or your gaming group, which all the proceeds of that go directly supporting me as a content producer, allowing me to buy more books and do more videos and things like that. I appreciate all of your support. I'm not a big company that produces 10,000 mats a time. I have one original design that I think is stunning for the Realm of Death, and I absolutely love it, and I think you will too. So thank you guys so much for watching, and happy working.